Now, the Police and Prison Civil Rights Union has meanwhile slammed Ipid for its remarks. Popcru spokesperson Richard Mamabolo joins us now for more. Good to have you, Richard, and thank you very much for your time. Interesting that you are having your 10th National Congress in KwaZulu-Natal as Ipid is particularly looking at the recent months and the actions of the police in KwaZulu-Natal, saying there is some degree of concern around the killing of suspected criminals and them not being arrested. How do you respond?
Well, thank you and good evening to your viewers. I think, well, that is quite unfortunate from the Ipid. The statement that they made is actually going against the very same motivation that we need to give our men and women in blue, because for the longest time they have been suffering at the hands of criminals. We've lost about 69 police officers just this year alone, and many more others are wounded with career-threatening injuries. So it's quite unfortunate that when we are at a turning point, when police start acting and, of course, taking serious decisions against police, we would have the Ipid saying that. The Constitution, the constitutional provision of Section 2205 suggests that police should definitely prevent, combat, and investigate crime. Now, we think that the Ipid statement is rather unfortunate because it happens at a time when we have lost so many police officers and there had not been many investigations done into the causal reasons around these killings. In fact, the Ipid has not been interested in that. What they have always been pursuing is to ensure that those police officers who are brave enough to act, or who are rather who are not considering the very same clauses such as the Section 49 of the Criminal Procedure Act, which speaks to the use of force, or rather the use of firearms, have taken decisions because they wanted to save their lives. I think what this comment that Ipid has made is basically suggesting that police should only act once they have been attacked, and in most instances, police end up being killed by criminals. So we're quite clear that no matter what justifications are made by Ipid currently, that are just the clip that you just played, we think that police should definitely not die with their firearms on. They should act decisively. But we also want to say that we need to obviously look into some of the acts. For example, the Criminal Procedure Act that governs policing currently is some legislation which was adopted back in 1977. So it needs to be reviewed as well to ensure that it's in line with the current trends of crime, and of course there should definitely be more protection for police officers. So we need to look into all those aspects. Yeah. As to what Ipid has suggested, we totally are against it, and we think it's rather unfortunate. They would have could have of course used a different platform, and of course I think this is discouraging. It also says to our members that immediately when they act against criminals, who have been killing them, by the way, it means that Ipid is already waiting for them to be investigated. Yeah. And that is an approach we cannot afford to take as a country.
So Ipid saying, of course, their response is birthed out of a media inquiry around the recent events and the recent killings of would-be suspects, which have also raised questions from members of the community. Ipid, do you think they have a point in what they're saying, that yes, the police might be saying there has been brazen retaliation from criminals to the extent that police are actually losing their lives in the line of duty, but they still have a responsibility to investigate? They can't just take that at face value and take the word of the police on it.
Look, in fact, in most cases that the Ipid has been focused on have been cases which were pursued and investigated by the SAPS itself. The Ipid only comes in at a later stage when these cases are supposed to be prosecuted. So I don't think there's any justification for what they want to say or what they are claiming to say, because at the end of the day, what the reality is that police are being killed on a daily basis. And when police are conducting their duties, which is, of course, instituted within the Constitution, which is to obviously prevent and combat crime, they cannot be investigated for doing their work. When police officers meet criminals who have got, firearms, and then there's an exchange of firearms, why do you want to investigate police officers? Are you saying to them that in the future, the message that Ipid is sending is that in the future, when there are confrontations between police and criminals, police officers should not take any action, and that cannot be acceptable.
Now, what do you say around the responsibility question, which I put to Ipid? You're saying, for example, this is demotivation for the men in blue. And what we have been hearing, for example, is an encouragement from the authorities, including the National Police Commissioner, including the Minister of Police, to fight fire with fire. But the Ipid's view is that, well, the person who takes the last action is the one responsible, irrespective of what the supervising authority would have told you to do.
Look, police, when even if the last person to take any action would be responsible, the fact of the matter is that it is well defined within their mandate that they should obviously take some form of action. But again, that is why we're saying that we need to obviously revisit the Criminal Procedure Act to make sure that those legislations are quite clear about how police can actually defend themselves, because we feel that at the current moment there isn't sufficient protection being meted out at police officers. In fact, in most cases, when police officers defend themselves, they get charged for it. And whether it's within the SAPS or by Ipid, similar trends have been happening. That is why there needs to be a review of that. But look, I don't think we can sit back and say that because there have been certain incidents which would have taken place, which of course we think we would like to see more taking place to discourage the criminality that is happening in our country, then police must be condemned. We definitely do agree with what the Minister of Police and the National Police Commissioner are saying, that police should fight fire with fire. Police officers have been killed and nobody is saying anything about it. Nothing is being happening about it. So there definitely needs to be sufficient action in retaliating to all these attacks.
What's the view then of Popcru, while we are on that question, to Minister Cele's announcement around the increase in the death grant to 300,000?
We do welcome that initiative. In fact, remember that both the death grant and the death, the danger allowance, of course, have been a contentious issue. We have had a danger allowance being stagnant at 400 for quite some time. It was only increased recently to 700. And yet we are also still not happy about it. We think that it should be increased to 1,500. That is in line with the agreement that was signed back in 2011 around how it should be increased on a yearly basis. With the death grant as well, we think that 250 is too little really. I think Mr. Bekele and the President on a yearly basis commemorate the death of police officers. And most of the police officers who are killed on duty are these young police officers who are still starting up with their families. So the 250 was not sufficient enough to actually take care of their families. So as much as the funds are increased, we also have a further suggestion that we should look into having death insurance for police officers. So immediately when an officer enters the service, there should be some fund allocated for that insurance, which is paid by both the employer and the employee, to ensure that it then adds on to the death grant that Mr. Bekele speaks about. So that would actually ensure that the funds are quite higher. And of course, we think that those would obviously be used to ensure that families of the deceased are sustained, because the majority of our members are breadwinners.
Therefore, what do you think then needs to happen here for greater protection for police officers in the execution of their duties, seeing that, I mean, the 7 instances now are being investigated by Ipid, and largely meaning that if anything adverse is found, those police officers are going to be facing the full might of the law?
Yeah, look, I think there are short-term and long-term plans. In the short term, of course, we would encourage members of the police to work in bigger groups and to obviously be cautious around the environments which they operate in. I think part of the challenges, of course, have been around load shedding, for example, the declining staff complement, the uneven allocation of resources. You know, you go to any police station in a rural area, you find that there are probably about 3, 4, 5 people working on a night shift with one vehicle available for them to serve a community of over 30,000 people. So you would not expect police to be to provide the necessary service under such conditions. Whereas in the affluent areas, there are sufficient resources, the infrastructural integrity is quite good. So there are all those challenges that police face on a regular basis. So in the short term, of course, we encourage our members to work in in bigger groups and be cautious around their situation, because just wearing a uniform alone, you become a target, and criminals are clearly killing police officers either to take their firearms and perpetuate further criminal activities, or for the cases that they have been investigating or some of the arrests that they've made. So we need to look into all that. But in the long run, of course, what we had suggested through our policing endeavor, which we held just earlier in August in Gauteng, was that there should be legislative amendments to ensure that the killing of police officers is declared as treasonous. You know, treason, of course, is then any act against that aims to overthrow the state. And because the police the role of police is constituted within the Constitution, it therefore means that any killing of a police officer is against, obviously, the Constitution, and we believe that this will obviously need to include harsher sentences so that people who would want to kill police officers have to think about it twice. In South Africa, for example, when you speak of a lifetime, a person is sentenced to a lifetime, it basically means 25 years. And we have obviously seen many cases wherein people would get parole after obviously behaving well within those correctional facilities and being released. So we think that we need to obviously reconsider the sentences as well.
All right, Richard Mamabolo, much appreciated. Thank you very much for joining us tonight here on In Focus.